what is your title?
Great. My name is Dana Stevens, Danastevens, and I'm Director, Clinical Services.
Okay. What does the Director of Clinical Services do at Northwest Autism Center?
Well, one of my main roles as the clinical service,
That's okay.
my title has changed many times.
Uh-huh.
One of the main roles as my position as Director of Clinical Services is to oversee all the direct services that we do with individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities, particularly applied behavior analysis, their ABA programs. So looking at our in-clinic services as well as our community-based and in-home services. So those are direct services that we supply to the children, young adults, and adults and families with autism. But my job also encompasses more than that. It's not only just delivering and overseeing those services, but my job encompasses more than that, not just seeing the direct services that we do in clinic and community-based, but I also work in the community. And so I do several trainings for different community members, whether it be police officers, whether it be daycares, whether it be a Rotary Club. I work quite extensively in the schools to be able to help do services and access to services. Another role that I have is also looking at interprofessional education, meaning I work with all of the major universities. So Northwest Autism Center has contracts for practicum placement and experiences with all the local universities here in Spokane. So we will be working with individuals who want to become board certified behavior analysts in the ABA program. We have students that are seeking to be speech and language pathologists. We've had social workers. We've had occupational therapists that come through to help build that competency and capacity across the board for multiple disciplines and those going into the field. As well as I also accompany our executive director on many things for a systems approach. So maybe going and speaking to the legislature, being on several advisory boards, whether it's local or whether it's state, and sometimes be asked on a national level. So we really work on, and my job kind of hits all points of Northwest Autism, whether it's the individual, community, continuing education, or systems approach.
Some of your favorite stuff that you get to do?
All of it. I think that all of the different hats that I get to do is I get to have an opportunity to really hit in all aspects of the lives and families and communities and systems that I like to be a part of it all because you can't just be one section. I was a faculty member at Whitworth University, and my background comes in special education and teaching, where I was a teacher, and I taught teachers how to do that, but that's one section. And the opportunity to come to Northwest Autism Center to really hit all aspects of life. If you're talking about treatment, you have to talk about the community to talk about treatment. If you're talking treatment, you have to talk about systems. And so having all aspects across the lifespan to really have a meaningful thing, honestly, all of it is really my favorite part because you can't do one without the other, and you can't do change over time without it.
So what is autism?
So autism spectrum disorder, otherwise known as ASD, so you might see that abbreviated, really manifests blah, blah, blah. So autism spectrum disorder, otherwise known as ASD, has two main areas of deficits. The first being social communication. So that means how individuals can socially communicate with each other, whether it's verbally, whether it's through nonverbal gestures to be able to communicate wants or needs or feelings. It's about how people develop relationships. And so that back and forth of peer relationships or back and forth communication. So really the core deficit is how people socially communicate with each other. And so that's a primary deficit of autism. The other side for social communication, the other side is about ritualistic and repetitive behaviors. So looking at the behaviors that individuals have. So that would manifest where they could be very restrictive in the sense that they need to follow routine. And if you deviate from that routine, that can be very challenging and create issues for them. It also is where they might have repetitive behaviors, or otherwise known as stereotypic behaviors. So people classically might see hand flapping or tapping, or they walk. So something that they do over and over and over again. Another aspect of the behavior component could also include sensory processing issues. So whether somebody is seeking out different sensory, such as sound, touch, taste, movement, they might want to seek those things. So they want to get a lot of noise, or they might be hypersensitive to it where they're trying to avoid it. So that's where you would see individuals who have challenges in very noisy situations, or don't like to be touched, or really have issues with feeding due to the tastes and textures for those things. But it is a neurological disorder that is manifests differently across the lifespan. We also know that there is not a cause that is known for autism, so therefore we do not have a cure. And that being said, with treatment or over time, it can manifest differently over time, so people can get treatment and then maybe don't need, well, that part of stuff, I'll start that part later.
Yeah, start that, yeah, and you don't have to go all the way back.
No.
Yeah.
But so it can manifest differently over time. And so when you have a young child and developing peers and relationships might look very different than middle school or high school or adults. One thing about autism is it's not just about being socially awkward. If you have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, it must impact you functionally, how you functionally work in society, how you have relationships and things like that. Another component of autism spectrum disorder is that it must manifest itself in childhood. And it is a developmental disability, meaning that you can't get autism later on in life. And that might be characteristics that you might see of autism in adolescence or those things. See what I'm saying? That's a different thing.
Well, let's talk about that right
Okay.
now, because you did that in training. So talk a little bit about that, because you had that in your presentation.
Right. So autism spectrum disorder really needs to manifest itself in early childhood. It's a developmental disability. However, that does not mean individuals get a diagnosis at that time. We can reliably diagnose at 18 months. Unfortunately, on a national statistics, it's usually about 4 or 5 years. And in some cases, what we see in our area, it could be 6 or 7 years old. We have free screenings at Northwest Autism Center. And about a third of our screenings that we do, not for a diagnosis, but for screening for further evaluation, about a third of those are under the age of 6, which is hoping what we want to get so they have an early diagnosis, we can get them into treatment. But about a third of them are school age, where they're referred by school districts, or families haven't come into screening until then. But what most people don't realize, a third of our screenings are for ages over 21. These are adults that are coming in. Maybe they had a misdiagnosis of a mental health, they didn't have a diagnosis, they weren't quite sure about things, but a lot of adults do get a diagnosis of autism, not because they developed autism in adulthood, but now they're getting the access to resources or more information and getting those screenings across the way.
So parents who are working with their small ones and stuff like that, you said that sometimes children are diagnosed early, but then they seem to be developing, some children develop just fine, and then at a certain age, then they show other signs. So tell us a little bit about that.
One thing that can be confusing for individuals about autism spectrum disorder is that, and what the research has shown, is that we can have autism at birth. Now, we cannot reliably diagnose until at least 18 months, but a lot of research has gone on where people videotape their first year birthday. And after someone gets a diagnosis, we can kind of go back and see, oh, they're not touching the cake, they're scared of the noise. So, and the families have reported that they've always known something was of a concern. They weren't developing, they weren't using eye contact, they didn't want to be held from all the way from birth. There's other families, and another component of autism, where individuals can be actually developing on track. They are using eye contact, they are hugging, they might be using language and words and have so many words. And then about 18 to 24 months on average is what parents report, and what the research shows, that they start to slowly lose skills. They start not having as much language, they're not doing eye contact, they're not pointing anymore. And some say that that is kind of late onset of autism. One thing about the vaccinations and the misconception about the vaccinations, as we know that the research has been debunked, and that is vaccinations are not a cause of that. Due to the fact for this population that were developing right and meeting their milestones in about 18 to 24 months, started losing skills, that's about the time that the MMR, the mumps, measles, and rubella shots, is given to children. And so that was where there was some thought of a correlation. Oh, they got this shot and doing those skills. But we know that that's not an actual coordination with that. So that's kind of
Good,
stuff.
and the doctor said that too.
Right, and you can go into that.
Vaccinations do not cause.
Do not cause
autism.
asthma, but that's
Yeah.
the 18 kind of
Yeah.
24-month thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of misnomers out there.
Mm-hmm.
What is the spectrum? Well, you can go from here, you can go to here, you can start here, but with treatment and stuff like that, you can go here. So let's talk about the spectrum.
So there's definitely a reason why spectrum is in the name of autism spectrum disorder. A Dr. Shore coined very common to her, said, Dr. Shore coined a very common term that said, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. I've been in the field and seen many individuals who have autism, and I don't know them until I know them. I know the characteristics, I can see what the diagnosis criteria are, but as far as treatment or understanding or what their needs are, you really need to understand the individual because it is so widely diverse. It is one of the most diverse diagnoses that we have, and how it manifests can look very dramatically different. So classically, you will see two types of things that people think about when they're autism. You can think of some of those where they're very highly, intelligent, maybe savant, and they're very verbal, but they're socially awkward, don't like routines, don't like to look at you. Versus another end of the spectrum are for some individuals that really are nonverbal, have no means to functionally communicate their wants, their needs, their thoughts. They're the ones that maybe people see with hand flapping or doing these odd repetitive movements and not looking at you or they don't think they notice them in the room. So there's a really wide range. And guess what? There's kids and adults all along the spectrum and in between. So the social communication and the behavior part can change at different times as well and how it manifests. We know that with early intervention, we can change the trajectory. There is a lot of research that demonstrates that. Young children's brains has plasticity, and we know that during those critical years, we can actually change the plasticity in the brain. We know that we can reduce adult costs by 2/3 if we're able to have early intervention. Some individuals with early intervention can be able to go into elementary school and not receive special education, maybe not have what we call a 504 plan for accommodations. You could walk into a classroom and you wouldn't be able to distinguish them from others. They still have autism, but they receive treatment or strategies, and others around them know what to do to accommodate how their brain works and how they need to function during that time. But as social communication is the deficit of autism, that might change in middle school. That will change in high school. When the social demands change, they don't naturally learn that from their peers or from experiences in life. That has to be explicitly taught because their brains don't recognize that. So how do you do relationships with boyfriends and girlfriends and the awkwardness in middle school when people are figuring that out? We might need to do more supports during that time. We might do more treatment for that phase of their life, just as they might be able to do fine during that once they have those strategies and supports. But then in adulthood, trying to get a job. If I have a challenge of socially communicating and my social skills are challenged, I can't go into an interview. Intelligence is not a part of autism spectrum disorder criteria for diagnosis. And so many times, not all, and some do have cognitive disabilities along with autism, but it's not unusual for them to go to college. I have 2 degrees in chemical engineering, and I'm extremely brilliant in that. But if I can't get through the interviewing process because I can't look you in the eye, make a little joke, see how you're feeling, and be able to respond appropriately, then I can't get that job. Or if I do get the job, how do I work with my coworkers that maybe don't understand this disability, or maybe don't understand that I have a interest that I like to say over and over and over because they have a tendency as part of the diagnosis to be focused on that. And so keeping those jobs. So we really need to understand how this manifests over the time. The autism doesn't change, the expectations change. Expectations in life and how we get through life socially for all that and relationships change. And so that's what we need to be able to remember. They're not changing, either their supports or their expectations are changing, and we need to be able to help them address that.
Time out.
Let's talk about, we'll come back to that, because I think I want your
Yep.
brain to
Yep.
process it,
Yep.
and you'll say it in a different way. Let's talk about the statistics.
Mm.
So what are the statistics showing these days? When you showed us the PowerPoint, we were going,
Well, I think that the general public would be shocked. And whenever I talk about the prevalence of autism, whether it's classroom teachers or daycare providers or whoever, talking to somebody in the grocery store when they ask me a question, they're shocked about the statistics and the prevalence of autism. It's been in the media. People know it's happening. There's been some radio PSAs talking about statistics. But the statistics since the Center of Disease Control, the CDC, has been doing it, has shown a dramatic rise in the incidence of autism spectrum disorder. For instance, in 2018, the CDC came out that the prevalence now is 1 in 59 overall, but it's 1 in 37 boys, because boys have 4 times greater chance of being diagnosed and having autism than girls. And so when you think about our elementary schools, and you think, I went to my son's open house yesterday, there's 4 classrooms. And if you think about 1 in 37 boys having that, they are going to be in every single classroom, every single grade, and everybody will be encountering them.
what are they saying about the cause?
Well, the cause of why, so the cause of autism spectrum disorders is the billion-dollar question. Or at least I would like to say it's the billion-dollar question, but it doesn't mean there's billions of dollars going into it. And we need a lot of research and a lot of experts coming into this. What we do know is that autism spectrum disorder is a neurological disorder and has a genetic component. So therefore, you might have a predisposition for having a diagnosis of autism, but there's some environmental stressor that kind of pushes you over the edge to actually have that. So anyone pushes you over the edge. Now, I'll start that part.
Yeah. So so there's a genetic component to it, but there's also something
Right.
else that may.
Right, and so we know we do know that there's a genetic component to autism spectrum disorder. About 18 to 20% of families who have one child with autism has another child with autism. And there's a lot of research of twin studies to go through. So we know there's a genetic component. What that is, we're not sure. But we also know you might have a predisposition for that. But there are some environmental stressors, which we do not know what that is, of tipping the scales to be able to have autism spectrum. It's kind of like autoimmune diseases, the same type of thing, where you have a genetic predisposition and then you go over. So, but one thing to understand about autism is it's a worldwide epidemic. This is not a first world or a third world disability or an epidemic. It is across all minorities. It's across all ethnicities. It's across all countries. And every country is seeing an epidemic of the rise of this disability.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about races
Mm-hmm.
and all that.
So autism does not discriminate. However, that being said, it doesn't mean all minorities or ethnicities are getting diagnosed or access to care at the same rate. So the CDC in the new 2008 prevalence rate, we have seen that there have been closing the gap of diagnosing for minorities, but we still haven't moved the dial. We still have dramatic discrepancy for Hispanics to be able to get a diagnosis as earlier as treatment as other populations.
So are other countries addressing this differently than what the United States is?
Mhm. Well, since it's a worldwide epidemic and the rise has been seen in all countries, there have been countries coming together to try to combat this. I did some work in Africa, the Global Autism Project. Oh, that wasn't it. That was what the others did.
Yeah.
Stuff too. That was it. It was a research stuff too. So countries are tackling this differently. As different cultures perceive autism differently, such as some cultures have a very negative connotation to it, so they might not address it as openly, and some of those individuals are more hidden away, versus other countries, such as China, for instance. They are actually starting, the government and some colleagues and friends I know are starting intensive treatment programs throughout China, trying to address this early intervention and treatment for individuals to address the increase of autism. Several countries in research are coming together to find out about prevalence or looking at cause. In 2012 in South Korea, actually the United States, Canada, and South Korea came together, and they actually went door to door and actually did evaluations on their population to see about the incidence of autism. And they found a rate of 1 in 35 for the kids in 2012. And so there are a bunch of global things that are coming together to work on this.
What are some of the, let's talk about ABA
Mm.
in your
I know
mind.
too.
What is it, we addressed it a little bit with Jill and everything like that, so let's talk about applied behavior analysis and say it that way, and then you can say
Right.
ABA. So, what are you finding with it clinically?
Mhm.
You've used it before, you've seen results with it. What is it? Why is Northwest Autism using it, and what are the fallacies about it? What are the good things about it?
So, applied behavior analysis, which is also known as ABA, is based on the science of human behavior. This is nothing new. Now we have insurance reform, that people have access to treatment. Now we have providers that are doing treatment, even though we still need a lot more capacity for those that are trained to be able to deliver this critical service. This has been around since the 50s. It's been around from the 40s to the 50s to the 60s. This is just basically the science of human behavior. It's a misconception for many reasons. I've been a board-certified behavior analyst since 2003. I was one of the first almost 1,000 internationally to be a board-certified behavior analyst. How I got into ABA and applied behavior analysis is because I was a special education teacher. Special education and the science that we know is applied behavior analysis. Applied behavior analysis is more than this discrete treatment that we do. Again, we use it in all aspects of our lives. For instance, organizations use applied behavior analysis to assist with productivity. And how do they get their employees to, be more productive on, how do we build cars and functions? One of the examples that I use is applied behavior analysis. If you walk into a casino, it's all about applied behavior analysis because they are changing the environment or setting up the environment to get you to behave in a way to stay and gamble, for instance. Everything looks the same. You don't know where you're going. There's no windows. You don't know if it's night or day. There's no clocks. You have what we call intermittent reinforcement, which you just get that hit just enough to keep me to go. Oh, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Oh, I won. Oh, just a few more times. So applied behavior analysis is more than just this one discrete treatment. It's everything about life. And when you are trained in it, I loved when I started learning the true science about it, walking in all different environments, being like, whoa, that's how they get them to do this, or this is how people navigate environments. To look at applied behavior analysis, I like to take the applied and the analysis and kind of switch them. Basically, we analyze the environments in which we live. We analyze why people behave, what we call the function of their behavior. If I am doing a certain behavior and I don't have communication, for instance, and the only way I can get something done is I hit and I hit and hit, like they're communicating. Behavior is communication. Our job is to find out why are they doing that and give them the communication skills to get something else versus I don't need to hit, I can give you a picture to get the cookie that I want. So we actually analyze all parts of environment, all parts of what people do, and we look at the behavior. And we look at the behavior in observable and measurable ways. We know that people think and feel, and we recognize that, but I can't get in your mind and know what you're thinking. But I can look and observe and measure that behavior. So we analyze the behavior in applied settings. And that is the critical point of applied behavior analysis. It's in all environments, it's with all people, it's with all things. Because we can teach children and individual skills in one setting or in the clinic, but if they can't walk out that door and do it with their classroom teacher, or go to the grocery store, or do it with their grandparents at Thanksgiving, then we haven't done our job. And that is part of the critical component of applied behavior analysis. And another aspect that people don't realize about applied behavior analysis, part of our science is that we look at socially significant behaviors. And the way I like to think about that is, how do we increase quality of life? What is important? What is important to that individual? What's important to that family? What's important to that community? We don't just do things because we think they should do it. It's because that's part of their lives. That's part of what they need. We need to look at their culture and what's really going to make the difference. And part of the misconceptions of applied behavior analysis comes through the early years and some individuals taking portions of the science and making things that are very discrete. And so there are punishment procedures in the science of human behavior, but we use all positive procedures. That one I might cut it back out.
Yeah.
Cut that out. That came out.
To address ABA, and what are the things you do at the Autism Center that has been really successful for both your little guys and maybe your older people?
Right. So applied behavior analysis has been proven through science and research and empirical studies, which is why now it is a covered medical necessity treatment for individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities. This is why the insurance companies and litigation have mandated that people have access to this treatment. It's because it is the one that we know is effective and it works. So when individuals do applied behavior analysis, the first step is to do a really thorough assessment. So we talk to the families and the individuals, what is important, where are their current functionalities. We use very systematic testing procedures. So there might be some standardized testing procedures that we look at specific skills. So we would look at adaptive skills, their eating, their dressing, their toileting, toothbrushing. We would be looking at some academic skills. We look at the whole picture of the person and do an assessment for that. What many people would know for applied behavior analysis is called a functional behavioral assessment. And a functional behavioral assessment is when we systematically assess why somebody is behaving. Are they looking to get something and obtain something, or are they looking to escape or avoid? Whether it's an activity, whether it's a person, whatever those, it's escape or obtain. And we look at why they're doing a behavior. Along with that, with the functional behavioral assessment, is then that drives what we do for treatment. oh, they're doing this because they need this. So what we do is try to say that behavior that you were doing doesn't work anymore, but I'm going to do a replacement behavior. Critical thing for a misconception is that we get rid of challenging behaviors, but we never say no, meaning don't do something, unless we know what we want them to do instead. We have to give them a replacement behavior so that they can utilize that and function in a socially appropriate way and get what their needs and wants are. After a complete comprehensive assessment, a comprehensive treatment plan is developed for each of the clients with the participation of the families. And so we will do why is it medically necessary, what's the review of records, and very detailed goals and objectives that outline exactly with the criteria what we're going to be working on, as well as the interventions to be able to deliver the treatment with. Included on that is family and caregiver goals as well as on the treatment, because it's not just about doing the individual client treatment, but it's also about what goals are the caregivers going to do during treatment portion that we do, the education and those components. So we also have very concrete goals for them. We deliver treatment. It's also our board certified behavior analysts work with our behavior technicians. So our certified behavior technicians are certified with the Department of Health here in the state of Washington, and they're the ones that do the direct services. They're the ones that are one-on-one or working with the children, delivering those interventions at all times. Our board certified behavior analysts, also licensed behavior analysts here in the Department of Health licensure. They're the ones that do the assessments and oversee all the treatment interventions. They're there, they're working with them, they're observing. But there's data collection that is taken at every single level of every single program, and those are analyzed and looked over every day. So we know, wow, they made this goal, or this isn't working, what do we need to change? So it's a constant looking at what they're doing, taking the data, analyzing, changing programs, delivering intervention. Taking data, analyze, and that cycle goes for every skill and everything that we do. So it's constantly changing for what that individual child and that family needs during that time. It can look very different from intervention from what we call discrete trial training. So what traditionally is known as ABA, you're sitting at a table, you're pointing to a picture, and it's very discrete skills that are happening one-on-one. But applied behavior analysis can be also doing through play, which we know that's a critical component for that. So they can be playing and going.
So let's talk about the myths.
Right. I think one of the most important jobs that I have, and seems to happen more than anything else, is myth-busting applied behavior analysis. When I first came over to Spokane in 2007, I was the only board-certified behavior analyst anywhere over this side of the mountains, and only very few on the west side. And individuals say, oh, I do applied behavior analysis. And now we're getting different stuff. I'll do that later. That's getting into the weeds. So one of the myths that is most often done is that applied behavior analysis is only used when a child has challenging behaviors, and you want to get rid of challenging behaviors and do replacement behaviors. That is only one component about it. Remember, we're talking about the science of human behavior. Another component of applied behavior analysis, which is critical and absolute, is skill development across the lifespan. So again, I said that special education teachers use applied behavior analysis. They use it for the academics. We use it for how to do adaptive behaviors, like how do you brush your teeth? How do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? All those daily living skills are a component. Children are having trouble taking a bath, we will do that. Maybe it's going to the park and working with, playing with other kids on the playground. How to do social interactions. It's also about how do you get a job? How do you maintain a job? So another aspect of it, it's not, even though early intervention is so critical and important, is not just for young children. Another myth, it is not just for autism spectrum disorder. It is proven effective for other disabilities. It is proven effective across a lifespan for geriatrics. So if somebody is not taking medication, medication refusal, we would use applied behavior analysis to get them to be able to take their medication. It is also not done in a clinic in isolation. It is done, as I said, in the playground, in the schools, in the job, at the YMCA. We'll go and do treatment because it's all about how they're interacting in their environment and the skills that they need to succeed, whether it's skill development, socialization, maybe it is reducing challenging behavior. So it encompasses all aspects of life. Again, because we want to do things that are socially significant and increasing quality of life. If we do the treatment in isolation, it's unethical and it's not applied behavior analysis.
How do you work with families? That was excellent.
Okay.
That was perfect. That was excellent. Working with the families.
So we work with the families in all aspects. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
one of the things I would love
Yeah,
for you to
yeah,
talk
talk
about
about.
is when in your
So working with the families is as critical or more critical than working with the child or the youth or the adult. It takes a village to be able to raise any child. It takes a really educated big village to be able to raise or assist individuals with autism spectrum disorders. Critical component that we do with parent training is that to help them understand what are some of the interventions or different approaches that need to be done specifically for their unique needs of their child. So if we're doing treatment or doing applied behavior analysis and doing an intervention, and it's great that the behavior technicians who are working with them or the board certified behavior analyst knows, but if we don't transfer that knowledge and ability to the families, we haven't done our job. And they need to know when they're at the dinner table, what are some things they need to do to reinforce that child to try different foods, to be able to expand their repertoire of tasting foods or doing that, or how to sit at the table, or how are they going to do daily living skills such as bathing or dressing. And it gives them an ability to really understand effective methods that they can use throughout their lives. And the critical part is, I want to get myself out of a job for many reasons. It shouldn't be a lifelong thing that you need a therapist stuck to you going each day. We want to give you the ability and the skills. Now, that being said, you might use our expertise again throughout the lifespan, but it's their child, it's their ways, and for the first time, for many families report, I understand now what works, why it works, and why it works for my child. And that is the biggest thing that we can actually do and say, I get it, and I feel confident, and I feel better about what to do with my child. Because again, it's a big misconception, and I think families have reported, we talk about it, is it's difficult to do extended families, and we want to reach extended family too. We love to have the grandparents come in. We've done phone calls with aunts and uncles that live in Georgia. We have people that were visiting to come to some of our parent trainings to be able to explain to them what about autism and why these things are. Because many families can be very judgmental. Well, if you just did this, and it's like, I've done everything I can. And how do we do it differently to meet my unique needs of the kids? But another misconception is that applied behavior analysis is just not about individuals with disabilities. It makes you a wonderful parent overall. And good teaching is good teaching, and good parenting is good parenting. And I guarantee most of that is based on applied behavior analysis.
that you see that kids won't do, and how
Right.
ABA can help with that.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
So people don't understand that ABA is just not reducing challenging behaviors or developing skills. ABA is critical and can be life-saving for individuals and families. For example, refusal for food intake or eat is a common challenge that we have for a lot of our children with autism. For example, children with autism, due to their sensory and textile and multiple things, it's not that they can't chew, swallow, or physically intake food. It's a behavioral issue that they can't do food. For instance, I saw a cooking show one time that I love because that's my secret passion, where a mother was going against different chefs to go through, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and she beat all these professional chefs. And they said, "Why could you do that?" "Because my child has autism." And they're like, "What?" "My child would eat nothing but white foods for years." So that's a horrible thing. Sorry.
Yeah, let's just talk
Yeah.
about, but
Right.
what you just said is,
Right, for years. So
we've
right.
heard of a child,
Right. So there's issues that children have failure to thrive because they will not do food intake. They will eat one thing, or they'll only have liquids, or they'll only have salt, or they'll only have sweet, or they'll only do it for a color. And so, for instance, if a child only will eat things that are white, and that's it, I'm only going to eat white. I'm not talking beige. I'm not talking yellow. I'm not talking yogurt with the black spots, right? What they're looking at is, so if you go to the grocery store next time and walk up and down and say, if you can see only things that are white, and that's the only thing you're comparing, I mean pure white, think about the challenges you have to be able to have nutritionally and to do that food intake. So increasing food repertoire is a critical component of applied behavior analysis that we do in our clinics. Our children have failure to thrive. They do less weight. Families say, if you put it in front of them and they get hungry enough, they'll eat. This is a neurological disorder. They won't. They will starve themselves to death. You will not wait them out. And we need to address those medical issues. And applied behavior analysis does that. So, for instance...
Yeah, what would you do with food?
Right. So, for instance, part of the treatment of applied behavior analysis is breaking down skills to a level of where they are in functioning, which is so important for what we do for our assessments, to know exactly where they are, and then how do we systematically build those skills up. For instance, if they have food that they cannot tolerate, cannot see, they don't want to touch, they don't want it on the table, we'll just put the food on the table and let them tolerate that. Once they're able to do that, we'll put it on the plate. Once they can tolerate that, then we'll have them touch it. Once they meet that goal, we'll have them pick it up. Once they meet that goal, we'll have them touch it to the lips. Once they meet that goal, touch your tongue. Then you would touch and put it in your mouth. Then you can take 2 bites and spit out. Then you can put 2 bites and spit out, and then you swallow. And the next thing you know, the mother's crying saying, "Oh my goodness, my child ate an apple for the first time ever, and it changed his life. And you saved his life because now he could do this, and we can work on others to make sure that they can eat and thrive and be healthy where otherwise they couldn't access that."
And another thing that we shot, let's talk about the communication piece.
Right.
So
Okay.
you have, what is the board called again?
So there's a empirically based intervention that is called Picture Exchange Communication System. So individuals who have autism, oftentimes you might have heard Temple Grandin talk about that she sees life in pictures. So when they think in things, they see pictures. And pictures are really easy because they're static. They're there. I can see it. It doesn't go away. When you're hearing things that are auditory, it's in and out, and it's hard to process some of that information, as well as why it's challenging with sign language, is because it's here and it's gone. But if you have a picture that represents things, and I don't have the language, or I might have language that can't quite process those things and articulate what I want to say. The system, so you have a picture, you exchange that picture as my form of communication, and that's the system that we use. It's systematic protocols that teaches individuals and children to use a picture to say, I want a cookie. I want to take a bath. I want Sesame Street. So if I can't say it, even if I'm verbal, but there's so many things going on or I'm so frustrated, the static picture that is universal. One of the greatest things I saw going to McDonald's one day is, and we did this back in the 80s and 90s of using pictures so people can point and see what they want. And I saw accommodation at McDonald's where they say, if you want a picture menu, go up and ask. That is the greatest accommodation stuff. So I can go up, if I give you a picture and I say I want a hamburger, or I point, I want French fries, you know what I need without any words, without anything that needs to go in. It's universal, which is part of the critical component of this. It works for people that have different languages as well. So the idea of the picture exchange communication, PECS, is that they will take a picture and I will go up and give it to you and you go, huh, you want a cookie? You get that cookie. And the children get to know that in a very rapid succession. So the first stage, there are 6 phases that go through that go from a simple exchange to, you'll hear some of the families and therapists talk about putting it into a sentence strip. I want a cookie. There you go. And then the next stage we talk about, that's distance and persistence, which people miss, is that I'm going to be persistent, because you have to do that when you communicate. If I give you a picture and you're not dealing with it, then I'm going to be persistent. No, hey, this is my communication. I want to do this. So they can be persistent. So it's a systematic thing that actually builds up language. This is a functional communication system, meaning they can function in life with all different things and different people in different places is the ideal for that. So those that are nonverbal, if they are able to do this system, can do that. It also builds language for those that have verbal communication skills but have a hard time putting it together. The research demonstrates that it doesn't limit communication and verbalization, but actually can increase that communication. It's also a system that families and schools and peers can actually really learn. My son, my middle child, was what we call a peer model called the Domino Project. It was an early intervention program at